Before I introduce the speaker, because the focus every day should be on equity and inclusion in our lives and our classrooms, I'm going to share 2 stories that are very personal to me. At the age of 8 years old, my parents brought home a new sibling. Her name was Luan, and she was our new sister, and she was 12 years old. Luan was born in Vietnam, and at the age of 2, she contracted polio, and her family placed her in an orphanage because they could no longer care for her. At the age of 11, Luan was brought over to the US by a Catholic charity and placed in an orphanage in Rosemead, California. She met my family because my grandfather owned and operated an orthopedic appliance company in Whittier, California, where his business was dedicated to making specialized braces for kids and adults with polio or other afflictions such as cerebral palsy. So my parents brought Luan home, and I had the great good fortune of growing up with a sibling who did not know the language, who did not know the culture, and at 12 years old had to figure out how to navigate this new world, and had to do it from a physically disabled point of view. And she and I shared a room, and it was on a daily basis that I saw how she overcame challenge after challenge. I'll end the story about Luan by saying that she ultimately moved out, was independent on her own, and she went to San Bernardino Valley College, where she met her future husband in an accounting class. She got married 2 years after she finished at San Bernardino Valley. She started her own company, and she runs a very successful company in San Bernardino. And it's weird for me to say, I'm grateful to have had her in my life. Certainly I'm proud of her, but what she brought to my life and how she helped me see the world as a physically able person and what she had to navigate as a disabled individual taught me so much about the world. The second story about my family happened when I was the summer going into my freshman year of high school. My parents received a call from a basketball coach in Linwood and Compton, California. And the coach told my parents, "I've seen your kid play. Cindy's a very good basketball player. I'd like her to join our travel team for the summer. We're going to travel all over California and Arizona. It's an AAU team, and we think she'd be a great addition to the team. The catch is," she told my parents, "Cindy would be the only white kid on the team. It's an all-black team out of Compton and Linwood. And you'd have to bring her out to Compton and Linwood for practice." Without consulting me, my parents said she would love to do that. And I thought I was a really good basketball player before I stepped on a court in Linwood, California at Linwood High School, where every single one of my teammates were faster, more skilled, more talented than I was. And I spent that summer just trying to catch up, trying to figure out how to be a better basketball player. Now, I knew I wanted a scholarship to college in basketball. And that summer, I just knew that all of my teammates would be similarly situated and they'd all get scholarships as well. Fast forward 3 years, the summer going into my senior year of high school, I signed a letter of intent to Arizona State University and accepted my scholarship for basketball. I went back to see how my teammates did. Only one of the 10 teammates was able to accept a scholarship to college. She went to UNLV, and she was what was called a Prop 48, which meant she was not academically eligible her first year, but she would be if she could become academically eligible. Now, I was 17 years old. I didn't know how the world worked. I could have easily assumed that I was intellectually superior to my teammates because I was able to pass the SAT and I was able to accept my scholarship as a senior in high school. What I later learned were things that structural issues I did not know existed. And now I know, because of the research I did during my doctoral program, that in the state of California, all public schools are not equal. And in 2002, there was a Williams case where the Williams versus the state of California demonstrated for 4 years, they won the case, that opportunities were less available at, in particular, high schools and schools with students of color in economically disadvantaged areas. They had textbooks that were severely out of date. They had instructors and teachers in the classroom that were not credentialed to teach the discipline that they were teaching. And they had facilities in their schools that were dilapidated and not well maintained. The difference between me and my teammates back then was my family was able to live in Orange County. They could afford to live in Orange County, where I went to Orange County schools and then later private school. where I had textbooks that were current and teachers that were credentialed, and I had opportunities and resources that were not made available to my teammates. I've never forgotten that, because my scholarship to college launched me into my career, contributed to me being an administrator, I hope successfully, and caused me to see the world differently when I went through my doctoral program to understand really institutionalized racism and structural issues in our society that lead to not certain individuals and certain populations not having the same opportunity. So I am super pleased to introduce our speaker today, because this is something that I have been focused on for my 20-year career. And I wanted you to see at least a small example of what helped shape me as a person and as administrator, because these issues of equity and inclusion are deeply personal to me. And so I was super excited when Dr. Pindikar accepted our invitation to speak this morning, because she has dedicated her career to these issues of social justice and equity in education. So let me read to you a little bit about her. She goes by Sumi. She was clear to tell us that, and I appreciate that. Sumi serves as the Chief Learning Officer and Director of the USC Equity Institutes at the USC Race and Equity Center, dedicated to advancing racial justice in higher education and other sectors. The body of her work focuses on helping campuses, nonprofits, and other organizations build capacity for social justice and racial equity. Sumi is a scholar, practitioner, whose research interests and publications focus on critical race theory, Asian American and Pacific Islander students, change agents, and institutional transformation. She is an amazing educator, leader, and transformational speaker. Please welcome to the stage, Sumi Pindikar.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. How are you? I just want to thank Cindy for that incredibly kind introduction, but also the personal testimonial, which I think beautifully centers us for the morning and the time that we have together. I don't know if there's anybody else who'd like to come on in and have a seat. You don't have to stand. If you like to stretch your legs, feel free, but please come on in. We have the time to do so. And come on down. It's like a game show. You might win a prize if you sit in the front. So I'm going to walk back and forth a little bit today. We're going to move around a little bit. I'm going to have a little bit of Q&A with you. We'll get a chance to chat, of course, at the end of this talk. But please feel free to take care of your bodies throughout. If you need to stand, stretch, take a bio break, you take care of you while we have this time together. I'm really grateful to be here, Irvine Valley College. Thank you for having me. All right, let's get this. So this talk is titled No Time for Spectators. Any of you have ever read Howard Zinn's essay, Can't Stand Still on a Moving Train? This idea, right? That things are happening whether or not we want them to happen all around us. And what does it mean then for us to pull away from our roles as spectators to be active change agents in systems and structures that surround us? So we're going to do a little bit today. I've got a 5-part keynote designed for you. I'm very excited about it. But first, before we go any further, thank you for having me. I'm excited to see some friends in the room. I'm also very much looking forward to starting your USC Equity Institute in just a couple weeks with 20 folks in this room. Thanks for your great leadership. Linda, June, so many other folks, Amy. This is me. This is how you can find me. I always think the time that we have together is really the beginning of a much larger and longer conversation. So should you ever want to talk further, ask for resources, have a conversation, please get a hold of me. I'm too old for Snapchat, but everything else is there. So find me. And if you're a tweeter, you're welcome to tweet this or follow me on Twitter as well. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. So let me always start. I like to start with a little bit of centering of who I am. Why am I standing on this stage in front of you? And a little bit of story. So I always start with family. And any one of you could be up here telling your story in the way that Cindy told a little bit of hers. But this is a snapshot of my family. This is 1976. I'm the baby in the picture. That's my parents, my dad looking cool with his hippie hair. And he's wearing, of course, his tunic, his kurta, and his jeans. He's already rocking his fusion fashion. My mom's still in her traditional sari. They immigrated from Karnataka in South India in 1970. And you can also tell other things by this picture. You can tell a little bit about our ethnicity and our heritage. You can also tell that that was their mode of transportation, that bicycle. You can tell by the cinder block bookshelves that that was their bookshelf that my dad pulled together. When they came, although they came from landed families in India, very little money was allowed to be brought at the time, similar to many immigrant stories, and my dad was forced to start his education all over again. What's interesting about his own narrative, of course, is that because he came and started his BA all over again at this really interesting time in US and Canadian history, he was exposed to so much. He was already radicalized in a lot of different ways in India, but getting involved in community of color movements, in post-colonial movements, here changed the trajectory of his life, his research, so many other things, which then, of course, affected my life, my brother's life, my mom's life, so many other people's lives. But I always start off with it's personal, and this is where some of my earliest interests in thinking about race, culture, class, ethnicity, access start from. Immigrant family, growing up bicultural. Any children of immigrants in the room? Immigrants yourselves? Great, thanks for the show of hands. That was a good solid over a third of you in the room, by the way. Now, growing up, I grew up, anybody from Chicago in the area? Okay, Chi-Town. All right, thank you. I got a woo, that's Chi-Town right there for sure. North Side, Evanston, Illinois is my hometown. Evanston's a fascinating place. It was the first suburb to integrate outside of the city of Chicago. But although it was integrated, it was oddly still segregated in the way that Chicago very much is. And so the north side of Evanston was much more white, the south side much more black. Different economic strata also between North and South Evanston. And that sort of marked the terrain of my life. The first few years of my life, we lived in North Evanston. And then the second part of my life, we lived in South Evanston, where my parents could afford a home. So I grew up in a black neighborhood, going to a black school. This is the first part of my life, though. This is a lot of Evanston. Majority black and white. Again, this was the 80s. You can see my kindergarten classmates. And then there's me and Sarah Kim, the one in the middle, who I went to school with through high school. And that was sort of my experience and my brother's experience, being one of a few. Not black, not white, in a majority black and white area. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, who am I? And part of that is a journey, right? You can't spend your whole life only defining yourself in opposition to something else, not black or not white. Very important to know what you are not, but then what are you? Who are you, and what does it all mean? I had a strong sense of my ethnic identity, growing up Indian and Indian American, bicultural, traveling back and forth to India and being multilingual, multicultural. But a broader sense of racial identity really developed for me in college. I went to Northwestern University in Evanston, all of 3 miles away from my parents. I was very daring. Pretty bold there. But this probably, when we think about pivotal moments in our own lives, this marks one of those turning point moments for a lot of reasons. Not just for what occurred for my sense of identity and self, but also for my sense of agency as someone who could be involved in changing an environment, in cultivating the skills to actually shift what is occurring around oneself to make it more open, more inclusive, and more meaningful for the people that it purports to serve. And so this was my experience. And I did all the things. I was an RA. I danced in every Indian cultural show. I was in dorm government, did all the things, founded a political student organization. But probably one of the primary pieces of my life there was my 4 years of involvement as a student activist and as a student organizer in the struggle for Asian American studies, ethnic studies. Any of you got to, in your own educational experiences, take ethnic studies courses, women's studies, queer studies, gender studies, sociology, right? Or currently teach any of those? When you take those classes, you may have had an experience like mine in which I finally found a place where there was language to describe the experiences I had that I didn't necessarily have the words for prior. And it was like an explosion to be immersed as a women's studies major, struggling for Asian American studies, also as a double major in history, being involved and eventually leading this movement, building capacity for organizing, developing coalitions, allyship. And before you know it, this laid the groundwork for essentially the next 20 years of my life, We did get Asian American Studies at Northwestern. In fact, they recently celebrated 20 years of the program, recently got a full major. The work continues by students and by incredible faculty and staff there. But that piece, this piece of desiring to be valued in the educational environment, in a way that my undergraduate alma mater at the time didn't really seem to be, has shaped my own educational and sort of discursive trajectory. What does it mean to be seen in the environment, fully and wholly, and to be embedded in the curriculum, in the structures, in the policies, in the processes of an institution, in the way that many of us who identify as folks of color, or queer and trans, or disabled, or low income, or first gen, do not see ourselves reflected? That became an interesting question for me that's then shaped these last 20 years through multiple degrees, through research, through publishing, through work and work and work, and raising a family as well. So I want to center us in this idea, and again, I really do appreciate Cindy's story, the personal piece of this. I pulled this image for you because I find it fascinating. How many of you in the room have kids or nieces or nephews that you read children's books to sometimes over and over and over and over again? The same ones. And some of that is wonderful, of course. I pulled this for you because this comes from a study on children's literature. And although our focus for today is not on children's literature, the image is so evocative to me. It's the whole idea of windows and mirrors in children's literature. And the idea is that for children of all backgrounds, you want to have windows to be able to see and understand the experiences of others who are unlike you, and you want to have mirrors to have your experiences reflected back to you, number one, and to also see the possibilities for yourself in the totality, in your wholeness. And what this image depicts, some interesting things here. Oh, I was told to stay in the light by Jeff. I return to the light. So check this out. This is percentage of books depicting characters from diverse backgrounds, fairly recent, from the 2018 publishing statistics compiled by the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the School of Ed at University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a phenomenal center. For all of 2018 children's books, 1% featured First Nations, Indigenous children. That's 23 books, just 23. When we think about windows and mirrors, think about what that means. 5%, 170 books, Latinx, Latina, Latino, and Latinx children. 218 books, 7% Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander, and Asian American children. 10%, 301 books, Black African American children. You add up all of that, it's still less than animals. Now, don't get me wrong, animals are a wonderful way to have an understanding of the world. I'm not anti-animal, don't tweet that, right? That's not the point of this. The point is that animals become the proxy for us to understand the other, or to build empathy, or to see different things. And it's more than the experiences of children of color. Then we get to 1,558 books, 50% of the books featuring white children. To be very clear, this is not me saying we should not feature white children. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway is, what does it mean then to actually construct a world as educators, as policymakers, as deciders, in which we build true windows and mirrors for all who we claim to serve? That's a guiding question for us, for today, for this professional development week, for any of us who want to be in these environments that, by the way, are rapidly changing. Now, Orange County's demographics have shifted so much in the last 40 years alone. You've seen these shifts. And they're keeping a pace with the demographic shifts in the nation in unique and different ways, because it's Southern California. But there's something to be said here about what does it mean in your own sphere of influence, where you sit and where you have power, which is a concept we're going to come back to, about how you build windows and mirrors. So hang on to this idea. Those are all meta concepts. I talked a little bit about myself. I talked about this idea about windows and mirrors. And I want to center our specific student experiences. I pulled this set of quotes from a student that I worked with just a few summers ago who was in the EDGE program. The EDGE program is a program designed for young women of color who have already been accepted into PhD programs in math, something I could never hope to do, a PhD program in math. So they're already accepted, they're headed to these incredible PhD programs, and they spend the summer prior preparing for what it's going to be like to be in these PhD programs in math all across the country. It's an immersive program, it's really powerful, EDGE. And I'd asked the students to talk a little bit about what they were nervous about, so we could get it all out on the table and we could actually unpack it together. And this is what one of the students had written, because I'd asked them to do a writing exercise. And I'm going to read it because I know we all process differently. I'm going to read it out loud. I'm nervous that I will fail. I'm nervous I won't be as smart as others and will be at the bottom of the pack. I'm worried I won't socially fit in. I'm worried that if I do poorly academically, it will in some way be reflected back onto my gender and enable others to pass judgment. I worry my male peers will not take me seriously. I worry it'll be too hard for me to cope and I won't have time to dance. And so in centering that story, I want to hold the tenderness and fragility by which this student shared her vulnerability with me and with the group that she was with, and to also say I hope we're never immune to these stories, to the desires to dance, to the desires to be seen, and to the desires to be served by our educational institutions. So I give that to you just as something to say, these are hopes, fears, and dreams that so many of our students carry, so many of us have carried in our own educational journeys, and so I want to root us in that as we go more forward and we become increasingly empathetic to our students' experiences. So here's what we're going to do today in this 5-part keynote. We're going to define the terrain a little bit, talk through some key concepts that I feel are critical, and some of you already do all of this work. So this will hopefully continue to build and add to your existing toolboxes and toolkits. Hopefully for some of you, there's also something new here that is useful to you that you can add to your own toolboxes and toolkits. So we're going to define the terrain a little bit about some key structures and theories that I think are critical. We're going to go a little bit into a look at demographic trends. Who are we actually serving? Not the imaginary student of the past, but who is the student of today and the future. Talk a little bit about power and your sphere of influence, move into some key strategies. How many of you in the room are faculty, teaching faculty? Okay, vast majority of the room, fantastic. And of course, the strategies we're going to talk about, while some of these are directed towards faculty roles in the classroom, so much of it is translatable for our staff as well. And I, of course, am a staff member. Very important to me. And I'm going to leave you with a challenge. Okay, does that sound all right? Okay, all right, let's do this. How many of you have heard this phrase VUCA before? Okay, good, no one, exciting. Exciting, exciting. It's a great acronym to me that describes the state of affairs on so many of our campuses, our country, and the world. We are in, I want to name this, we are in an incredibly difficult political moment, locally, internationally, geopolitically. And to me, there is nothing more critical in our work right now as educators than working with young people and any age people to make more empathetic world citizens. Empathetic and critical world citizens who know how to consume media, who know how to ask tough questions, and who need it in this increasingly VUCA world. We need it and they need it. This is what it stands for. It originally came out of military and business usage, but I think it's a good description for what we experience in higher education. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Does that do at least 2 of those words describe some of your job almost all the time? Some of the state of affairs in higher education, the way that you experience them here at IVC or at other campuses you've been at? Now, we chose the professions we're in as faculty members, as staff members, as leaders, administrators, because we wanted to make an impact, to change entire systems, to change the experiences of people, to put ideas and research into the world, and hopefully to also create greater opportunity, equality, and equity for all of those participating in these systems, students, staff, faculty, and everyone. But if we think about the world in which we're operating, then we want some very, very targeted and strategic skills to be able to navigate the potential instability that this generates, right? And I appreciate this one, which says, okay, if this is a VUCA environment, right, in which we experience volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, what do we actually need to course correct against that? And one of the pieces that I pull from talks about vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. I like all of those very, very much. Our ability to anticipate the issues that shape our environments, to understand the consequences of the issues and the actions we take to deal with those issues, to prepare with great clarity for alternative realities and challenges by aligning with what we say we are, who we say we are, and how we want to actually accomplish it, and then to be agile and nimble to address relevant challenges and opportunities. And the funny thing is, so many of us are probably nimble in our own lives, but higher ed, as our institutions, is like a slow-moving ship sometimes. And we want to be agile, and sometimes it's difficult to change course. And we all hope, of course, that we are not on the Titanic in our own institutions. We need to turn before we get there. So if we have this framework of saying higher ed as a field and our institutions, and particularly in the last 35 years, as we have seen the destabilization of the public good of higher education, the defunding and underfunding of higher ed by the state and by the federal government, and the increased neoliberal turn in all of our institutions that have made education less and less of a priority and more of a privilege for the few. And I know that I'm speaking here at Irvine Valley College, it's a community college, but where we're located, who we serve, all of these are questions of power and privilege and access, even at a community college as well, right? And so I want to hang on to all of this. In this VUCA world, this is a quote that guides me all the time. Robin Kelley is a phenomenal historian, and I love what he says here. He says, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. Think about it for a second. We, particularly as academicians, are trained to deconstruct. We're trained to pull apart ideas. How many of you have ever been a reviewer on a journal? Your number one job is to be like, reviewer 2, no, that sucks. Rewrite, resubmit, no, don't resubmit. It was truly terrible. We joke about this. If we're trained to deconstruct, then one of the skills we need in order to be increasingly agile in the VUCA confines of higher ed is a vision about building. And what does it mean to build towards something? From what I've heard from some of your colleagues here, equity and inclusion is a key facet of who you are now and where you're heading, and hasn't necessarily been in the past. So this is an exciting opportunity then for Irvine Valley College, particularly again as demographic shifts and trends move in interesting directions. So here's what I'm talking about. What are the possibilities to imagine something different, to increase the sense of belonging, and to serve and to support students and transform relationships, policies, and the institution itself as evidence of your equity-mindedness? Now, equity-mindedness is a big word. It gets thrown around a lot. And so I want us to actually spend a little time defining it. This is one of the key frameworks I want to offer today. Have any of you taken a look at the work from the Center for Urban Education at University of Southern California? Okay, I'm seeing about 4 or 5 hands go up. If you haven't had a chance to take a look, it's called CUE, the Center for Urban Education. Outstanding work, and the senior scholar who leads that center, Dr. Estela Ben-Simon, who also happened to be one of my teachers and one of my committee members, originated the concept of equity-mindedness, and so I'm going to pull from her 2007 definition, in which she basically says that, first of all, we run up against the fact, whether this is an HSI, an MSI, an ANAPESI, historically white institution, either way, we run up against the fact that higher education was originally structured for some and not all to succeed. That's the history of higher education. That's not a fact that or an idea that I'm making up. It's not an alternative fact. This is the history of higher education as structured in the United States of America, that it was originally structured for some and not all to succeed. And that's about staff, faculty, and students. And so much of the way that we actually do our business as usual in most of our institutions is still predicated on helping some and not all to succeed. So let me define this for you. Estella Ben-Simon says that equity-minded individuals are more cognizant that exclusionary practices, institutional racism, and power asymmetries impact opportunities and outcomes for minoritized students. That's exactly the story Cindy shared. Where she lived and what she had access to gave her pathways to opportunity that were different than her colleagues on the basketball team. Not because of who they were, but around the multifaceted factors around them. It was, of course, directly linked to who they were. She's white, Orange County. They're black, in a different neighborhood. And we have to be able to be blunt about how race and class in particular, in the nexus, create differential forms of access and opportunity in this country and in our colleges. So equity-minded individuals, therefore, attribute unequal outcomes among minoritized students to institution-based dysfunctions, while deficit-minded individuals construe unequal outcomes as originating from student characteristics. The most common way you'll hear this is, I don't think those students were as well prepared as they should have been. You know, those students didn't come from the right high school. If those students just worked harder, they could do better. Now, this is not me taking away the onus of personal responsibility, hard work, determination, grit, perseverance. I'm not taking away anything from any of that. What I'm asking is that for those of us who control the classroom, what happens in terms of our syllabi, our pedagogy, the curriculum, the structures around that, and that is not just the classroom, but also how are faculty hired, how are they mentored, how are they tenured and retained? Who makes these decisions and how are they made? This is where we have power to shape the factors that surround our students. Because it's much easier to simply say, well, those students didn't work as hard, those students were less prepared, therefore. But if we don't actually take a systemic and sociological analysis, we actually end up perpetrating forms of racism, classism, and sexism over and over and over again. And you've seen it. You've seen it on our own campuses. You might have seen it in your own practices. So for those of us who try to identify and try to do the work as equity-minded individuals, you want to spend some time reflecting on your own and your colleagues' role in responsibility for student success versus pushing it back onto the student themselves. It raises questions based on an understanding of power. So let me list these three, which I think are incredibly important. How do we know, here at IVC, who benefits from the initiatives, innovations, and programs that we're so proud of? How do the assumptions we make about our students disadvantage them? How do best practices take race and equity into account? One of my least favorite phrases is, our students are successful regardless of their background. I prefer the phrase, our students are successful inclusive of their background, because it means that you're actually taking that into consideration. What talents, assets, and experiences they're bringing to the table that can be leveraged in your classroom and outside the classroom. And then finally, how can we eliminate inequalities in educational outcomes? Now, some of you might be saying, you know what, I am bored with this equity talk. We've heard the words over and over again. I'm not down for this. I have to be honest, if we say we care about students, if we say we care about being teachers, if we say we care about being educational leaders, this is at the heart of our work. This fundamentally about saying that it's not just about who comes into our institutions, but who equitably leaves our institutions to equitably achieve what they want to in the world, that they have the same chances of getting the jobs, of getting the grants, of getting the research opportunities, of going to grad school or transferring, whatever is their path is meant to be. If they don't equally have those chances when they leave our institutions, we have not done right by our students. Not every single thing is in our power, but what is, we need to be able to manipulate and motivate and move forward. So let's start with that definition of equity-mindedness, right, in which we look at our institutional and personal responsibilities to change what we can versus putting it back on the student. How many of you have seen this image before, in some way, shape, or form? Let me just see by a show of hands. Okay, so about half of you have seen this image. Let me just walk you through it because I think it is a useful representation, not a perfect representation because no representation can be perfect. We've got a bias system that's very clear. It is unevenly stacked boxes, totally different ways of looking over this fence that is constructed, by the way, by American history, racism, heteropatriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just a fence. Equality, in which we say, well, if we give students all the exact same supports, they should be able to be fine, and if they're not fine, it's their fault. In ways and shapes and forms, we say it's their fault if they're not succeeding. So we say equal inputs, and yet we still have inequitable outcomes. Equity, in a practice, is actually deliberately unfair, proactively unfair, which is a funny way to frame it. And yet what it says is, I'm going to find out where my students actually need the appropriate supports and build that for them so we actually get to equal outcomes. A lot of times in the United States, we focus on inputs versus outputs. Well, if we give people equal chances, that we should somehow have equal outcomes, but it does not take into account starting places. And so looking at those to build systems around people. Now, folks have critiques of this image, and I think rightfully so, even though it's a beautiful place to start. This is actually one I like a little bit better. How many of you have seen this one before? Okay, I got a hand or two. Fantastic. I'm going to actually do a call and response or a call out from the audience. When you look at this image in contrast to the one prior, and let's go back for a second. Just take a snapshot of that in your mind. Tell me a couple of things that you observe in this photo that speak to you for any reason. You like it, you don't like it, you get it, you don't get it, whatever it might be. And if you wouldn't mind just saying your name when you speak, that'd be wonderful.
I'm Jean. They don't look like humans.
It's a starting place. They don't look like humans. All right. Linda, can you say that one more time, please? That's one of the things I actually really like about this image, right? That it explicitly states that the starting foundation is different. There was no level playing field to begin with in a false visualization of that. Yes, I see a hand here and a hand there.
The prior image was actually the person who's smaller, which could suggest that, well, the person who's smaller should never have the equal to defense, whereas here everybody's the same size. It's actually the foundation that is fair. The person is the same size.
Fantastic, right? Because here we could still say that the problem is inhered within the student. And we go back to here to say what is inhered within the structures and then within the institutional supports to actually lift students. And there was another hand back there, yes.
The symbolism of the person on the left, the number one figure. Oh, that's good. It's like a
It's like a, football game, baseball game where they have that. Yeah, there is interesting symbolism. Great. Anybody else? Yes.
I think actually also the fence. The blue has a shorter way to go to see the game as opposed to the yellow one. So compared to the first image had an equal play in terms of the end goal. This one had an end goal.
Right. So there's actually a lot embedded in one image. Sorry, there was one more hand. Yes, please.
I think the fence represents structure with people.
Right, fantastic. So Ace, and what's your name? Liz. Ace and Liz are pairing this concept, right? That the unevenness of the fence itself, right? Because it's not just the uneven foundations, but even the unevenness of the structures, systems, policies, and processes that surround, for example, our students, if we're going to extend that metaphor. I like the increased complexity of this image. Again, no image is perfect. Now, while not the intention of the original artist who came up with that first image, it can give the impression that the children themselves are being problematized because of their uneven sizes. And so in the same way we use deficit-minded language about students, underprepared, not college-ready, which puts the blame back on students, I would articulate and argue, we've admitted them. They've chosen to come here, so we have to be able to recognize and change where we have fences of inequity built into our campuses, here at IVC and every other campus. Now, I'm just going to name it. I like the image better because it accounts for different starting places, the grass. The supports are designed to meet the various inequities, right? They're differential levels of support, and the outcome, therefore, is equitable. Equity is the fundamental idea that because the world is organized around unequal systems and structures, we need to actually treat and invest in people differently in order to maximize outcomes. shouldn't be a revolutionary and mind-blowing concept, except from the get, here in the US, we are fed some twin threads about equality and meritocracy. And meritocracy is one of the main ideas that I wish I could rip apart every single day. If you work hard enough, you will achieve it, because here in America, that's the American dream. Again, without a sociological or historical analysis of racism, sexism, classism, history, and we can use a million examples from how redlining, Jim Crow, and poll taxes have been used to keep black people from being full participants in American civic society, all the way to the newest laws passed by this administration harming trans people. We cannot pretend that fairness, equality, and meritocracy are the name of the game. And if the minute we take our blinders off and we're not pretending anymore, then we actually have to deliberately take action to build support to meet communities where they are. I love this quote by David Asai. He's the senior director at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Any STEM friends in the room? Chemists, physicists, biologists, etc., engineers, mathematicians. For 5 years, I was the dean for diversity at Harvey Mudd College, which is a STEM institution. I loved my work there. David, for a number of years, was at Mudd, and then he left to go to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And so he writes this: all too often, our efforts have been focused on fixing the student while not critically examining the institutional culture and learning environment. The scientific community, and I would expand that, all of our educational communities need to shift the locus of responsibility from the students to the schools. Said another way, it's a conversation that's happening nationwide in every association, on every type of college campus, needs to be having this institution. Having this conversation, excuse me. So let me pair this broad concept of equity-mindedness and what it means to be an equity-minded agent of change in your institution here at IVC with a twin concept that I think is critical to this. I love this quote by Anais Nin, and she writes, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." Just think about it for a second. Think about the world around you. I'm going to go back to Cindy's story about what her sister taught her about navigating the world as a disabled person. A disabled English language learning sister in the same room. What that taught Cindy about what she came to accept as her reality. Do any of you remember that movie, The Matrix? Right? And once you take the red pill, you're like, oh, snap. I just exposed my age. It's cool, it's cool, it's cool, right? But this, to me, is one of the most powerful concepts. There is implicit and unconscious bias about our decision-making that originates from deep within us. Now, earlier, right when I started, I told you a little bit about my family history, my immigration history, my politicization growing up in my neighborhood, going to my college. And I think that's why I love this quote, because it's not just for the sake of that story that I think about this, but because every single one of us has a set of life experiences that shapes the lenses by which we understand and act in our environment. So the decisions we make are fundamentally shaped by what we know and have unpacked and examined about ourselves. Really small example. The faculty member, well-meaning faculty member, who on the first day of class says, "Where did everyone travel to this summer?" Now, that may not happen here at IVC in all of your classes, but that's a story I've heard from plenty of students across the country whose faculty members weren't trying to be cruel, weren't trying to point out that half the class didn't travel anywhere that summer because they were working 3 jobs or helping to support their families, or simply couldn't travel for a variety of reasons, or were undocumented and couldn't travel out of fear. But the faculty member, through the innocuous, seemingly innocuous question, which again was rooted in that faculty member's lived experiences, unexamined lived experience, says, "Where did everyone travel to this summer?" Expecting that the students are a reflection of him and his experiences. You can think of countless examples. Someone who designs an event and there's no easy ingress or egress out of the building for disabled participants. Someone who does all of their slides and never actually reads the slides, assuming that everyone is reading along just fine, whether they're English language learners or students with visual disabilities or anything else. The person who says, I don't need to use the mic, everyone's fine, right? And it's interesting, this point about using a mic, it's come up actually at a lot of the conferences I've been at recently, and people have been tweeting about it, right? That it's a pretty standard practice. Hey, everyone, I've got a loud voice, you can hear me, right? The thing is no, not everyone can. So what do? We take the extra step to ensure that we have maximum and full participation wherever and whenever we can. That is one small practice that we can do as equity-minded practitioners versus putting it back on people to figure out how to navigate something that wasn't designed for them to begin with. Equity-mindedness and self-examination go hand in hand for this primary reason. The unexamined self holds both privilege and subordination in one body. I shared with you a little bit about my story, right? I told you I identify as Indian American, racially as Asian American, I'm a woman of color, I'm a feminist, I'm a leftist, I'm a mommy. I'm able-bodied, I'm a cisgendered, heterosexual woman. I'm currently middle class, I'm highly educated, I'm multilingual, a fluent English speaker, and I'm a citizen. I'm a blue US passport holder. For everything that means, and for everything that holds. And so there's a lot in that little nutshell, right? I just told you about forms, many forms of privilege I have access to, and just really quickly, hip pocket definition of privilege for anyone who wants it. Unearned, unasked for sets of advantages that are accrued to you based on the relationship of aspects of your identity to forms of power in a given society. Unearned, unasked for sets of advantages accrued to you based on the relationship of parts of your identity to forms of power in a given society. So if I unpack my own body for you, I access cisgender power, right? Really basic example, I don't think about what bathroom to go to. I access heterosexual power, I hold my husband's hand in the street. We make out every once in a while if he's done the dishes. Right? As a fluent English speaker, even though I continue to be told, wow, your English is so good. Thanks, I was born here. So's yours. Right? So we have these pieces of our lives that access forms of power and also subordination. I'm also a brown woman in this country, and the number of times I've been told to go back to my own country based on which brown nation the United States is invading at that given moment over the last 25 years of my life is fascinating. The forms of violence I've been subjected to as a woman, and particularly as a woman of color, in the workplace, on the streets, by people who were friends or bosses or other forms of power, those are all real. And privilege and subordination are constantly in conversation with each other in our own bodies, particularly how they interact with forms of power in a given society, in this case, US society, right? But I want to make this point and bring it home about unexamined privilege. Unexamined privilege is a critical blind spot for most of us. For those of you who identify as able-bodied and are not thinking about the needs of students with disabilities, for those of you who identify as cis or straight, cisgender meaning your sex and your gender match, or straight meaning heterosexual, that you're not thinking when you ask certain questions in the classroom or force people to out themselves. Or we're not thinking about our low-income students when we say everyone has to do a certain project that might cost a certain type of money, or that may preclude them from trying to go to their job and meet their hours that they need to meet so they can pay their family's bills. So many different places here that the unexamined blind spots create gaps in how we end up meeting our students. The reason I use the word blind spot is because that's what it is. How many of you, when you drive, you have a blind spot? All of us do. Everybody does in their cars. In fact, everyone's eyes have two blind spots. All of us who are seeing have two blind spots in our eyeballs. You actually, as you drive, have to shoulder check to course correct for your blind spots. That was a very nice shoulder check I just did, by the way. And if you don't shoulder check, you get into accidents. So when I say shoulder checking for our privilege-based blind spots, this is what I mean. Actively unpacking where you have privilege, not to make yourself feel guilty as I said, unearned but unasked for, but to say, where do I maybe have a blockage about understanding who the people around me are, particularly my students, what they may need, and in fact, what ways I'm operating out of my privileged self or selves that have created barriers to full participation in my classroom. It's an opportunity. It's a really powerful opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about who we're actually serving today. What do you know and not know about today's student? So let's run through this. Some of you might already be familiar with this. I pulled some of these data sets from the Lumina Foundation's brand new 2019 and 2020 data collection. Majority of college students work, not just at two-year institutions, but at four-year institutions, many full-time while supporting themselves through school. And what's funny, of course, if you watch standard American movies, this is not the student that's generally portrayed. Right? The standard conception of student doesn't include this, which is in fact the majority. 64% work, 40% working full-time, 49% are financially independent from their parents, 24% have children or dependents. This one's huge. And I saw on a board out there that you're working on some key issues, and I saw food, and I believe food security on that board as well. Homelessness, food insecurity, and poverty affect college students. 31% from families below the federal poverty guideline, 9% were homeless in the past year, and 36%, over 1 out of 3, face food insecurity. This is basic. If you're hungry, you can't learn. Now, you could be looking at me and saying, well, but is that a college's issue? Is that our issue? Do we have to deal with that? And I would argue yes. Yes. Now, is this increasingly difficult? We go back to this VUCA framework. Is this increasingly difficult given the public divestment from the good of higher education? Yes. And so this comes back to our institutional priorities. How do we serve the students, particularly those who are most marginalized in society in our colleges, to ensure that we get to building those equitable inputs so we have equitable outcomes? 37% of college students are 25 or older, 46% are first-generation college goers. So nearly 1 out of 2 are first-time, first-generation college goers. 42% are students of color. Now, 2014 was when we saw the first tipping point in education. 2014 is when the US public high schools, for the first time, graduated more students of color than white students, 2014. Now, of course, that's the national average. It's obviously different and uneven across the country depending on what populations are where. But that was the first time, and so we're seeing these waves that youth always change faster than older folks. So 42% now of students are students of color. And let me share this with you. This is California's public colleges, University of California, California State University System, and the California Community Colleges represented here. And you can see here, of course, that 74% students of color in California community colleges. 27% white. 6% African American or Black, 44% Latino, Latina, or Latinx, and 14% Asian American, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. So then I ask you this, right? If we have these frameworks of equity-mindedness and unpacking privilege in order to push against practice-based blind spots in an increasingly VUCA world, we cannot do business as usual. Now, I can only assume that here in Orange County, of course, you draw from local communities. Your population may look and feel slightly different than this, and yet also is probably changing rapidly as well. So let me shift this to talking a little bit about your sphere of influence. We've laid out a lot of the terrain of key concepts, theoretical options, and I want to tie this to what can you actually do. So I just showed you that data set about students in the California public colleges. This is faculty, racial diversity among tenured faculty. And it's interesting, racial diversity among non-tenured, meaning contingent, contract, teaching faculty of that kind is, of course, much more diverse. And we can have a whole conversation there about how that's also fundamentally racist. That the people who will not get tenure is where the body of color is. But take a look at California community colleges. So the national statistic is reflected at the University of California. About 70% of faculty are white across the nation. And I told you again, here in California community colleges, 74% of students are students of color. That is not reflected in the faculty body. 61% still white. And you've got 31% faculty of color. This is not changing at the same rate. Now, it's not changing at the same rate in anywhere in the nation, almost. Student bodies are diversifying like this. Faculty bodies are diversifying like this. And in fact, you can actually see that as a site of conflict at so many campuses across the country where you have had student protest. How many have been following the student protests, particularly since the fall of 2015? Student protests, particularly by black students and by other students, agitating and advocating for better resources, more training, more faculty of color. And the top 3 demands, by the way, there's a wonderful site called thedemands.org in which students gathered over 90 different sets of demands by students of color, particularly black student leaders across the country. And from that, you can see that the top 3 demands that students are making that have rocked college campuses are increased faculty diversity, number 1, more training of the existing faculty so they can be more inclusive, more racially just, and number 3, more resources, more spaces for communities of color to feel like the campus is also theirs. Again, in environments that were never built for them in the first place. Now, while this rate may not be changing as fast as it could, and I would, of course, always encourage you to continue working on diversifying your faculty body, diminishing bias in faculty hiring, et cetera, so you can better reflect the student population, who's here matters, inclusive of your backgrounds. So I want to offer just a couple things here. For particularly the faculty and also the staff, because this applies to all of us in our spheres of influence, I think one of the most critical pieces that we can bring to our work is our own mindset. Any of you have had a chance to look at Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset? And of course, it's not a perfect set of ideas. No set of ideas is perfect, but there's some things that we can draw from it. And my colleague, Daryl Young at Harvey Mudd College, broke growth mindset down into a really lovely way. We think about fixed mindset and growth mindset. Let's go back. Fixed mindset, most often, the example given is, oh, I'm not good at math. My sister has the math gene in the family, right? Which says that essentially being able to do math and do math well is something that is fixed, cannot be taught, cannot be learned, and is inherent to a person. And a growth mindset says that if I try, and if I fail, and if I keep trying, and if I also have good teachers, that I can learn, I can be a learner, I can gain these skills. So what he did is he took that idea of fixed versus growth mindset and broke it down to what does it mean to actually learn about equity and diversity. And again, every one of us in this room is on our own trajectory about learning about these concepts, particularly not just about race, class, gender, sexuality, identity, ability, citizenship status, not just about the specific axes of identity, but about the meta, about power, privilege, process, all of those things that then embed these identity factors. It's not just about identity, but about the construction of who is at the center of decision-making in our institutions. I love the way he broke this down. A fixed mindset would say, I'm a good person, I'm not a racist. I have black friends, done. We're okay. We can laugh about it, but you have people who say that in your life. I'm not homophobic, I have gay friends. You can insert any sentence you want here. A growth mindset would say, I would like to learn how to be more equitable, again, through the practices that define you saying you're not a racist, through effort and persistence. I can't attempt any difficult dialogues because I'm likely to fail and I don't want to be called a racist. I don't want to be perceived as a racist. I will try to learn what is needed for me to attempt this, and if I mess up, I will learn from that experience. It shifts the burden of our own learning. We are learners too, as much as our students are, particularly when it comes to racial justice, social justice, economic justice in our institutions. One thing that I love about my son's teachers, he's 6.5, his kindergarten teacher taught the kids the word yet. So anytime the kids would say, I can't do that, in the way, very loud and whiny way 6-year-olds do, she would say, yet. And he would come home and tell me this. Mama, I said that I couldn't do it, but then she said, yet. And I said, I can't do it yet. Completely changed his way of thinking. It seems like a very small thing, and yet the word yet at the back of a sentence ended up transforming the way he saw himself as a learner. Really powerful tool his teachers gave him, and we can apply it to this work that we need to do as increasingly equitable educators. If we match that with this concept, and this is something that is probably one of the most important things to me, is locating our sources of power and our locus of control. I always think of uppercase P and lowercase p power. Uppercase P power, not all of us have access to it. We're not all presidents of universities. We don't all own banks, et cetera, et cetera. I may not have uppercase P power in everything that I do. I always have lowercase p power. No matter where I sit, I have the power to try to impact what is around me, whether it's curriculum design, syllabus construction, whether it's a new policy that's being built, whether it's a new building that's being built. Why is it done and who is it being done for? Who is at the center of design? This is one of the most beautiful questions we can ask. In fact, the two simplest and most straightforward questions that I encourage everyone to ask are, why do we do things this way? And who benefits? Why do we do things this way, whatever that thing is, and who benefits? Now, if the answer you get back to the first question is, well, we've always done it that way, you've got a source of a problem right there. You can tear that up. Why do we do things this way, and who benefits? I'll give you an example. Back at Harvey Mudd, they wanted to design a new protest policy. Now, they already had a policy in place for student behavior if students broke windows or damaged property or anything like that. So we had to ask the question, why all of a sudden do you need a separate protest policy, and who is that specifically going to target? Which students will be specifically impacted by that in ways that the already existing policy somehow didn't manage to cover? And this is the way we try to unpack the way quiet forms of white supremacy manifest in our institutions. So I've talked a little bit about growth mindset when it comes to this work. What does it mean to leverage your own power in your locus or sphere of influence, and asking these questions? And finally, this one, which is really, really important to me, and I think it affects our work as staff and as faculty, and it's the concept of transparency, which to me is a teaching concept, but is also fundamentally a concept about equity. Marianne Wilkham says, transparency means teaching students about more than just the course subject matter. It means telling students about your rationale for how and why you've chosen to shape their learning experiences. How many of you feel like you do a pretty good job of this already in your classroom? That students really understand why they're engaging in the exercises, in the group work, in the writing assignments. If you're like, I'm okay with it, you can do a half arm too, it's okay. Okay, I see a few half arms go up. I saw one full hand go up. This is a prime opportunity for any of us who calls ourselves an educator. Equitable practices are good teaching practices. Good teaching practices are equitable practices. They go back and forth. And this one, it comes down to coaching, to mentoring, to teaching, whether we're faculty or staff. This is a tool of equity. These are some questions that we can actually frame. And we can think about this from the staff perspective as well. Whether we're designing an intervention, activity, a program, how transparent is our design? Do students actually understand why they're engaging and what they're engaging in? It makes for more powerful learning. What is the class assignment? What is the class? What is the assignment? How is it going to help students learn content and skills? And why is it actually important to them? So what's the purpose? What do students have to do to be successful? What steps do they need to take? Now, most syllabi across the country basically teach you how not to fail the class. They don't necessarily tell you how to succeed in that class. What do students have to do to be successful? What steps do they concretely need to take? Because transparency is completely tied, as are equity-minded teaching practices, to setting extremely high expectations and scaffolding students' ability to meet those expectations. This is not about lowering expectations. And what does good work look like? What are the criteria? What does good work look like? What does bad work look like? How is success actually measured in this class? And you think about it from the student perspective. Think about it from our own perspectives. Go back to your own college classes, and you think about the professors who helped you actually understand why you were learning what you were learning, and how that actually made your learning more exciting, more invigorating. And then you lay that across the backdrop of equity, and you say, if I was a first-gen student, how many of you actually, in fact, were or are first-gen students yourselves? Okay, that's a solid half of this room. How many of you grew up low income? We already know that almost 2/3 of you raised your hand when I said immigrant or children of immigrants. English language learners? Or English as second language, either way, whatever way you prefer to call it. Folks who identify as somebody with disabilities? When you think about it from the perspective of the other, particularly if that's not an identity you share, you have an opportunity to actually rip apart all that is hidden in the classroom, that hidden curriculum, to make it more open, more transparent, to make the path clear for students. One of the things that Cindy talked about was what her sister and her colleagues on the basketball team actually had to concretely overcome on their journeys, on their individual journeys. And this is one of the things I think about. If we actually took away all the artificial barriers that exist for students, particularly those who experience minoritization or marginalization, they could be thriving. But they're navigating twice the hurdles or 3 times the hurdles as some of our other students, again, for whom higher education was originally designed. This is an opportunity for you to actually level that playing field to get back to what we always say or we hope the American dream is. I want to make one salient point about this. When we actually expose the hidden curriculum, and when we make the path more transparent for all students, every single student benefits from that. Your upper income, white, male, cis, hetero student will benefit from that. And your students of color, your low income students, your English language learning students, your immigrant students, your first gen students will disproportionately benefit from that. That's exciting. There's something exciting and beautiful about that. So let's actually dive down a tiny bit into a couple of key concrete strategies. I'm going to leave you with a challenge as we get closer and closer to wrapping this up. Asset-mindedness is one of the most beautiful tools that I can think of. If you've had a chance to read any of Tara Yoso's work, Y-O-S-S-O, it's about community cultural wealth. It's about hard-won, hard-fought-for assets that our students bring to the environment that are often overlooked in the ways that we traditionally think about what are student high-achieving characteristics. But the ability to navigate systems and structures, the ability to be multilingual, the ability to think about problems in new and different ways, the ability to be problem solvers, those are all assets that our students are bringing, particularly those who are minoritized, that we often overlook in the traditional classroom. So here's an example. Office hours. How many of you do office hours? Most of you probably do. Good, and you do. But it's an odd place where inequities can often be reinforced. A student might come in saying, I don't know how to do X problem, X writing assignment. And what happens most often? Not always, but most often, the professor says, well, you're going to do this, or have you tried that? And it's a guided pathway with a set of specific fixed answers. An asset-minded approach says, start by telling me what you do know. It's not a place that actually many professors start with. Start by telling me what you do know. What do you understand about this problem? What do you understand about the essay prompt? What do you understand about this particular problem set, whatever it might be? And you take it from there. It's one of the things that differentiates the idea of cultural competence versus cultural humility. Cultural competence is the idea that there's a fixed set of mastery that you can achieve for those of us interested in this. Cultural humility says that the ability to constantly ask and seek wisdom is one of our most powerful aspects of ourselves as educators. It pushes against the idea that there's a fixed end goal of mastery, but rather lifelong pursuit of learning and also listening. And this flips the dynamic away from teacher as master and educator, but rather teacher as co-constructor of knowledge using this asset-minded approach inside and outside the classroom. There's so many interventions on college campuses that are designed to benefit minoritized students that are actually based on students who are failing. Think about it. You can think about programs here at IVC or other campuses you've been at. Those are deficit approaches. They say, oh, those students are not doing well. What aren't they doing well? Okay, let's draw from that so we can quote unquote fix these students so that we can try to retain them better. But we actually have an opportunity here to center the experiences of historically marginalized students, the students we've been talking about today. We can ask some interesting questions. Which programs have actually been successful at advancing underrepresented and minoritized students? Which students are doing well at IVC? Which students of color? Which queer and trans students? Which students who are disabled? Which students who hold multiple minoritized identities? How are they successful, and how do we use success modeling to help other students versus only deficit modeling? Which elements of these programs are or are not centered in your everyday courses or study in your departments? This one's a big one. Literally and figuratively walking the halls, classrooms and lab spaces, and common spaces with students to see the landscape from their perspective. This goes back to the idea of shoulder checking. If you shoulder check, if you're not shoulder checking, you're walking around the halls, and if everything's built for you, and particularly any parts of your privileged identities, then the campus seems right. Everything seems fine. To put on the lenses of students, to put on the lenses of the other, to walk through the world as the other and to see it through their eyes gives you a different perspective of the campuses we sit in and walk in. And a couple of key suggestions here. Now you can see these: reviewing climate data, disaggregating data, pulling it apart to as small ends as possible to actually understand lived experiences of students as well as faculty and staff. Conducting departmental reviews of materials whose voices and contributions are centered, whose are missing. I can guarantee you there's some voices missing in your curriculum right now. Not because it's something endemic to IVC, but rather it's something that's part of the broader system of how the canon doesn't represent the people that we serve, that we didn't serve in the past, and we definitely don't serve today. And then reviewing policies and resource allocations. So for faculty who are going above and beyond and are working with minoritized and marginalized students in unique and interesting ways, where's the professional development money that can be allocated towards their advancement? Where are the additional pots, right? Carrots and sticks. Where are the carrots that can be used to help them continue to advance their goals? Because oftentimes, it often happens to be faculty of color who are doing double the work, but they're not getting recognized because that's not part of their evaluation. Same thing happens to staff of color. And then finally this. I started with the VUCA framework: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. To be very, very clear, this is not about doing more, but about doing better, being more agile, and more collaborative. So a couple of last suggestions in this arena here. Let me put these up for you. Now, you've got a tremendous range of initiatives that have been developed and are in process of being developed here at IVC. How do they actually work together? Who's in conversation? Who's at the table who actually holds the various pieces from your staff and your faculty sides so that you're not double creating the same efforts? Are there strategies to bring together groups who are working to advance equity on your campus? Some campuses do better with this than others. But mapping what assets you already have to continue to build on that, and then to critically identify the gaps and shortcomings of existing efforts and programs. This is a big one. The second point in this second to last bullet here. Which current practices at IVC serve to perpetuate racial and other inequities? If we can't be blunt about it for ourselves, our students will certainly tell us, as we have seen because of student protests across the country. And then finally, this is a big one. Who has access to data? Data is our friend. Do we have institutional research in the room here today? IR friends, hello IR friend. IR is your friend. But having access to disaggregated data is one of the most powerful tools in our ability to actually meet the needs of our students in critically meaningful ways, and to also ensure that we're not duplicating and duplicating and duplicating. Neither do we have time for that, and we do not have the resources for that, not the human resources nor the fiscal resources. So I'm gonna do a shameless plug here, just for a second, and say that there's 2 books I'm gonna recommend if you'd like, not only because I'm involved with both of them, but which is the shameless plug part, but because if you are staff or faculty, I think that these are useful resources. Closing the Opportunity Gap, Identity Conscious Strategies for Retention and Student Success. That's Vijay Pendekar happens to be my brother. If you meet a Pendekar, we're all related. It's not like Smith or Patel. We're legitimately related. So that's my baby bro. But the book is really powerful because it is hands-on, step-by-step strategies for how we can actually close opportunity gaps across admissions, orientation, student of color programs, men of color programs, advising, literally across the institution. So I highly recommend it, all done from an identity-conscious framework. Really powerful. And this is brand new, 2020, brand new, Student Engagement in Higher Education, edition 3. The editor with that, with Dr. Sean Harper and Dr. Stephen Quay. And in this book, and I think this is really useful, we've got something like 28 chapters, but 7 of them are new to deal with the voices and experiences of formerly incarcerated and justice-involved students, more on food insecurity, housing and homelessness. There's more on Indigenous students, so parenting students. So we go back to the demographics I shared. Hopefully this is a useful resource for you, because I always like to be able to provide some resources as well. Now, in this time that we've had together today, we've covered a lot. We covered some theoretical frameworks for how we might want to consider approaching our work as equity-minded change agents who are cognizant of the power and privilege we have in our own bodies and the critical blind spots that creates in our praxis. We took a look at what it means to impact our sphere of influence, using our sources of power, using our ability to design our classrooms in a more transparent manner. And then we took a look at some very, very specific opportunities, whether it's office hours, whether it's unpacking the hidden curriculum, these last few slides on what does it mean to actually rip apart the environment, walking the halls, looking at your curriculum, looking at your syllabus. How are you actually collaborating on programs, and of course, leveraging the beautiful work of your institutional research friends to have a data-driven approach to doing equity-minded work at IVC. So I'll leave you with this final challenge. I love this quote by Beverly Daniel Tatum. Her book, Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria, had its 20th anniversary publication just 2 years ago. It's a powerful book. I highly recommend it. But let me read you this quote. I sometimes visualize the ongoing cycle of racism as a moving walkway at the airport. Active racist or any other oppressive behavior is equivalent to walking fast on the conveyor belt. Passive racist behavior is equivalent to standing still on the walkway. No overt effort is being made, but the conveyor belt moves the bystanders along to the same destination as those who are actively walking. Think about the visual. Now, none of you in the room may be walking fast on that conveyor belt of racism, classism, institutional white supremacy. But some of you, and maybe many of you in the room, are standing still on the walkway, because this entire talk was really about shifting practices, taking concrete actions in your arena, in your sphere of influence, to stop being spectators. So it's not enough to simply stand still and be nice. To concretely turn around and walk in the other direction through a set of choices that you're making every day to be more equity-minded, to be more just, to be more conscious of your own identity and how it manifests the environment. That's the challenge. But it's a beautiful challenge. I leave us with this visual to take us back to the idea of windows and mirrors. For those of you in the room who have had countless opportunities to both see the other but also see yourself in your totality and your fullness, Think about what it would mean to be able to do that for countless others. And for those of you in the room, maybe similar to me, who have not had as many opportunities to see myself reflected back in my totality and fullness, I hope this gives you continued energy and drive to build the world in which our children, your nieces and nephews, your siblings, can be seen for fully who they are and who they're meant to be, and that they can thrive in every environment that they're in. It's an opportunity and a challenge for all of us. I think every day when I get up, who do I do this for? Of course I do it for my students and our campuses, but I'll leave you with one last image. I do it for them. These are my littles. That's my 1-year-old Shama, my almost 7-year-old Shashi. He's lost way more teeth since that photo was taken. But I get up every day and I think about my little brown babies, and I think about the world that they live in and will live in, and I say, this is the commitment. This is what I want for them, this is what I don't want for them, and I recommit in that purpose every single day. I hope today, and the first day of your professional development week, you are setting your intention for your commitments to your campus, to your communities, to being equity-minded in the journey ahead. I thank you so much for allowing me to be in your space, and I look forward to future conversations.